Welcome to Clarity, the show that brings you what you need to know now in the world of cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. My name is Shira Rubinoff, and on each show, I will be joined by CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, as well as cutting edge companies and executives. We'll be covering the most pressing areas in cybersecurity and artificial intelligence today to help you cut through the noise and dissect the very crowded ecosystem we are living in today, bringing you what you need to know now. Today I'm joined by Ray Lips, CISO at Broadcom, as well as Vaughn Hazen, VP and CISO of CNRail. Thank you both for joining me here today. And before I begin, I would love for you both to introduce yourself to our audience and give them a little background of your career and your journey to where you sit today. So Vaughn, please, let's start with you.
Well, sure. I've been the CISO for CN for 5 years now. Prior to that, I was the CISO at Freeport-McMoRan, a mining company, for 7 years. And I kind of stumbled into security back in the 90s when the phone phreakers were attacking our organization at the time. And I kind of had to learn quickly what was going on and how to stop that. And then I was pulled in to cybersecurity after I was installing the gateway services to the internet, and I had a disagreement with the corporate information security officer over where to put the intrusion detection systems. And her consultant said, "Yeah, he's right." And she said, "Okay, you're in security now." So that's kind of how I got pulled in.
Well, thank you, Vaughn. And Ray, can you please introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Thanks, Shira. Ray Lips, CISO of the Symantec over at Broadcom, and had a long history of being CISO at throughout life sciences and financial services, places like Celgene and Citigroup and JP Morgan, Prudential Financial, Prudential Healthcare, Roche, and whatnot. Very similar positions at all those places. Got pulled into being a CISO when I was actually a part of internal audit. I had an affinity for detail, looked at all the problems, thought the small things would cause the big problems, and they said, you would be really good in information security. Come do that for a while. I did that. I went over to Citigroup, met a gentleman there named Steve Katz, who was one of my mentors throughout my life. And Steve says, we got a number one job to do. Let's write the information security policy for Citigroup. And we did. And ever since then, it's been enjoyable.
Well, first, hats off to Steve Katz. You know, he will be remembered. He was a luminary in our industry, and pretty amazing that you had such a great connection to him. And thank you, gentlemen. Very impressive career, certainly thus far. And I'll say thus far because I know you have a long ways to go still in doing all the great things that you do. And certainly your voices need to be heard and should be heard. And today we're going to talk about the focus of the CISO, generative AI, and the needs of a CISO in today's cybersecurity landscape. Ray, let's start with you. What would you say is keeping you up at night as the CISO in such a large organization?
So for me, what keeps me up at night is usually the simplest and the easiest and the risk that's been given to somebody else. I think we do a fairly good job of managing our own risk. We look at it through an amazing lens, but we somehow have a feeling that if we outsource something and give it to somebody else, the risk isn't really in our optics at the time. And if we don't see something all the time, we kind of forget about it. And that risk is big. So I know third party really keeps me up at night. And certainly we'll talk more about generative AI, but how to control that and make guardrails for that as well.
Oh, oh, thank you. And Vaughn, do you face any similar challenges? And if so, can you please shed some light on that? Also, would love to hear from your perspective. What is the most pressing area that you as a CISO are facing in industry?
I think one of the things that we're facing now generally is the changing regulatory landscape. Due to geopolitical tensions and other reasons, governments are getting more involved in trying to regulate cybersecurity as a whole. and they're looking to someone to hold accountable, and they've targeted CISOs.
Yeah.
It's certainly something that we all have to be concerned about. Uh, you know, most of the time, it's not an issue of, hey, we're not necessarily doing the right things, but the approach that they're taking with the focus on the kind of documentation or other concerns that may be coming into play. We may be doing the right things, but it might not be in the way that they want us to do it, and it could come back to bite us. So, those are some of the concerns that come up. The other thing that happens is, we're a growing and changing organization, and so we're bringing in new technologies. You mentioned AI. Certainly, there's additional risk that comes with that, and we're also feeling, I think, a little bit more pressure. There has been history in some organizations where they've seen a growing budget year over year, and I think that's slowing. But the needs that we have to address are not slowing. And so that's another concern that comes up is how are we going to meet this evolving threat landscape with this changing foundation that we're working from, and then face increasing regulatory scrutiny all at the same time. That's more or less what keeps me up at night.
Oh, that's certainly a lot to look into. The role of a CISO has changed quite a bit over the number of years. And, from another piece about the CISOs are certainly facing an influx of organizations to come to get them to try to buy something, get in front of them, get a few minutes of their time. And the struggle of dealing with budgets and time and being pulled by organizations is just going up, and it's pulling at you all the time. And in the past, people weren't being held liable by if they bought by brand. And certainly that was in the 90s, the early 2000s. Everybody was kind of on the same path of buying from the same organizations because if something went wrong, they were not really being held liable because you buy by brand, you're kind of in that safety zone. But as time has passed, we all know that the shift has come. And I know as organizations and certainly as CISOs, you're looking for the best of breed. You're looking for the right solution for your organization. What would you say that is affecting your organization in terms of vendors trying to approach you to get some of your time, as well as stepping out of the comfort zone of buying by brand and being open to looking at smaller companies who may be a better fit? Sivan, you want to take this one?
Sure. I don't like the term best of breed for what we do. We like to look at best in value.
Best in
Um,
value. That's a better way to put it. Thank you.
Yeah, because the reality is something that may be very, very good for somebody else may not fit well for our needs. It
Correct.
may not provide the requirements that we have. It may, cost too much to maintain or manage. There's all of those aspects that we have to look at it, and in terms of how it fits into our landscape and what we need. But in terms of engaging, the folks that are trying to sell to us, let's think about the fact that when I started going to an RSA, I mean the trade floor was a lot smaller than it is today. It basically takes up all the lower levels of the Moscone. So it's gotten pretty intense with the number of folks that are trying to reach out to us and trying to contact us directly, because they think, oh, well, if I talk to the CISO, I'm going to have a foot in the door, and I can work from there. And it gets to the point where they do their research, and their research is looking for any place that I may have a contact, any email that I may have, any phone number that's associated with my name. And I've had the situation where they've called my wife's cell phone number because it was something that I purchased, and tried to reach me through her.
Oh boy. How
And
did that work out for them?
not very well for sure. Um,
Right.
I think that the bigger issue, and I've even had cases where you've had folks that have gone up to senior leadership, trying to bypass the technical folks altogether, and use fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or FUD, to try to drive the pressure to come from above, and see if that works for them. You know, none of these are effective approaches because the reality is the senior leadership usually just comes to us and says, hey, what is this, or this is for you, or, whatever. Um, and it really doesn't buy them anything except for ill will with us. So, if you really want to engage, first of all, you have to have a message that resonates with us. There's got to be some challenge that we're facing that you have an answer to. It may not be the answer for us, but it has to be an answer that makes it worthwhile for us to have any kind of conversation with you at all. And secondly, you need to partner with us. You need to understand our context and whether or not it makes sense. And if you don't come with a pitch, in your first message that says, "Hey, I've seen this challenge for you," based on some conversation a podcast that you did or whatever, something that is relevant because you shared something or somebody from your team shared something, and I understand that you have this challenge. I think I might be able to help you. Do you mind if we have a conversation about it? Something like that may be an opener, but it's not with me. It's with my team and the folks who are going to be close to the ground, understand the issue better, and are going to be able to say, yeah, this makes sense for us or not before I'm going to get involved. So I think that's some good advice that they should think about before just the spray and pray approach of marketing.
I think that is valuable information, certainly for our audience. I know a lot of people contact me asking me if I can make introductions into CISOs, and I ask them these questions. What is it that you have to sell to them? Is it the right market? Did you do your research? Did there's so many questions that I think a lot of individuals and organizations don't really think about. And thank you for highlighting that. I think that's very important information for our audience to hear. And let's dive into a topic I think we're all very passionate about, AI and generative AI. And we talk a lot about security and the controls around it and having many areas where it opens a floodgate of possible problems that can actually occur. Ray, maybe let's start off with describing the difference between AI and machine learning. And I think you've mentioned to me before that a lot of people don't understand the difference. And then dive into the question. I'll give a clear picture to our audience that we could jump off from there and just dive into this whole topic of
Sure. No,
security.
that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, AI is crowdsourced material and data, and it depends on if that AI database is going to be the world, if it's going to be internal, if it's going to be within your industry. It all depends on that. And the issue with that is how good is the data? And once you publish or use that data, it's now your data. And are you willing to say everybody else's data is yours? Just think about what you do out there and all the answers people give you on a daily basis. Are they your answers or are they their answers? Because I find a lot of issues and a lot of answers I get these days, and I wouldn't want to really call them mine. So that's one of the things I do worry about. I do worry about a lot of the regulatory issues. I do worry about GDPR and the California privacy laws, and certainly the new SEC laws of what if I'm putting data or I'm using data of somebody else's that's intellectual property or that's confidential? How do I know that? I can go down a whole list of issues and challenges that some people are saying we're not ready. There are industries. I spoke at FSISAC, and when I speak at FSISAC and ask how many people are using AI in the workplace, I get 1 out of 100 hands go up. When I speak to other industries, such as healthcare, I get 90% of the hands go up. So what's the answer to this? Yes, no, in between? How do we trust it? It's a difficult, complex problem right now that I think a lot of work and research has to be done behind it. But all I can say is be careful.
No, those are very, very important words. We hear from the industry now, things are moving more to be automated, moving to the cloud, utilizing AI. But what about third-party risk when associated with these types of movements in our technology space? Vaughn, what would you say around that?
Well, I think one of the things you have to look at is the way that we've been doing third-party risk is basically sending out surveys and
Mm.
having someone analyze them and say, okay, it looks like they're doing a good job or not. It is not very accurate. It's not very timely. It's you know requires a lot of effort, and the level of value that we get out of that is questionable, and it doesn't put anything into context. What we really need to look at when we're talking about our supply chains is um, what happens if this organization that we're working with has a major issue, a cyber issue. Is there interconnection between us that can really create a problem for us? I can tell you that for us, we exercise our third party risk, our third party breach playbook more often than any other playbook that we have, because just about everybody that we work with has some kind of an issue that goes on, that we have to respond to and verify that we're not going to be, collateral damage in that engagement. The other thing is what if we're dependent on somebody entirely for producing or providing some service or product, and they are unable to do that because of a cyber event? Those are the kinds of things that we really need to be thinking about, and the way that we've traditionally done third-party risk is not getting us there.
No, that's very true words there. And when we talk about Gen AI and utilizing that within an organization across all disciplines and orgs within the organization, and they're saying, we're getting rid of the human risk situation. As we know, you're not getting rid of human risk when utilizing these capabilities. So, Ray, how would you say, from sitting in a CISO seat, that this is a problem and we're still in its infancy? Yes, we could see it being a nicer strong arm, being more secure if utilized appropriately, and certainly as it grows and develops. But how about today? How about companies who are just relying on it and saying, this is the way you need to go because I'll be way more secure than we are today?
Yeah, I think AI is doing great things with a lot of tools that are sold in the industry today. A typical question that gets asked by who the CISO reports to, typically the CIO: what can you do for me next year by cutting your budget by 30% and starting to use AI, and just do it. Just do it. Step up to the plate, use AI enabled tools, and I don't think you're going to need an increase in budget. I think I can cut you by 30%.
Wow.
Are we there yet? I don't think we're there yet. I think a lot of it has to do with trust. And I'm not sure all the regulators are happy with that solution, that they trust the AI solution to be used internally. There's a lot of it being used that is checked really, really well by people. But that's the same thing with any tool. Think of AI as any tool we use today in cyber, and let's look at false positives. And I'm sure Vaughn has been through this, bringing in some new type of detection tool, and sometimes you spend more time dealing with the false positives than you did when you were manually doing the work before. That's not to say it's not going to work and it's not going to be amazing. There's some products out there that do amazing things with AI, and I think you're going to see that grow as the accuracy grows, as people accept it, as it reduces risks inertly, and that's what's going to happen.
I like that you brought up focusing on and talking about the false positives that create the problems as well, because that creates a false sense of trust. The false sense of trust leads easily to a breach, whether it being human factors internally, externally, which every company is pretty much dealing with on some fashion or another. And Vaughn, when you're dealing or sitting in the CISO seat today, where would you say is the area that is the most maybe cumbersome when dealing with AI or trying to figure out, is there a way that I could automate, or is there a way I could take away some of the human factors lift and make it, let's call it, more secure in my space today?
Yeah. Well, a lot of the discussion about automation is just responding. like the whole sim SOAR type thing. And what you see is when you're working in an area like we are, where operations are key, and you're dealing with some technologies that are a little bit older, um, and there's a concern about, hey, what are we going to do that may break what's operating, that the entire organizational operations depend on. So we don't move trains if this stuff breaks, and you want to go in and have AI take an action that may impact that. I think there's a lot of reluctance to do that. We've got a very rigorous change management process that even for us, when we have an incident to deal with, which we don't have much in the way to deal with, but if we had to go and take an action, um, there would be an accelerated or an emergency change process, but there would be a lot of scrutiny on any changes that we make, with the idea of, hey, what else might you impact, and what problems could that cause? Because we want to keep the trains running. That's a big part of what we do. So I think that when you consider that kind of approach, the other aspect is safety. We have to have some of these systems running properly to be safe. And so if we interrupt those, there's a risk of safety. So um, I think there's going to be a slower adoption for some aspects of that, and a faster adoption in our organization for other aspects. So it just depends on where it runs in the business and what function it performs. But yeah, it's going to be a mixed bag for us.
No, that's interesting. Certainly, there's no one size fits all. And this would certainly point to that very strongly. Which industry are you in? What is it solving for? It's not a clear solve for everything. There's a lot of talk around it. This is the next best thing. VCs are running around to put money in quickly to anything that's associated with AI, calling it the true proactive approach to cybersecurity. It fixes the nuts and bolts from A to Z, right? It depends on the new hot and shiny object in the room, but it's important to highlight the issues you're both talking about. And let's move back to the CISO role for a minute. Ray, what would you say is the most rewarding part of being a CISO in your organization? And what is the most, or let's not say your organization, we're not talking organizations here. As a CISO, as you've held that role for many years in different organizations, the most rewarding part and what might be the most frustrating part? And that could be from really any area of being a CISO.
Right. I would say on the most rewarding part is, and I usually say this at the end of some of my town halls, and some people know me for this because I learned it from my seventh grade physics teacher. And the secret is, what do your brakes do on the car? And, I usually get everybody raising their hand and saying stop, and I say no. The brakes on the car enable you to go fast. Couldn't go fast if you didn't have the brakes on the car. Think of security as the brakes on the car, which enable the businesses to go fast, to move fast, to be progressive in what they do, to get out there first and win. And when we sit down with the businesses, that's what I try to encourage them to do, is to use us from the beginning and move fast. That's the most rewarding piece I would see. Challenges, and I know I've talked about this a bit before, I just never understand that the CISO works very, very hard to implement the policies, implement what's going on with regulatory, and the head of infrastructure is supposed to be there to push patching, take away our malware. The businesses are not supposed to sign exceptions to putting patches on their servers and on their software. They're supposed to not be accepting the risk, but moving forward. And everybody works really hard to do this. At the same time, the CISO is constrained with budgets a lot of times, is constrained with the businesses not wanting to patch, is constrained with infrastructure not patching as they need to be. And when something happens, who gets fired? The CISO. And This always
Uh-huh.
always concerns me that it's the CISO that ends up taking and bearing the brunt for this. And we've seen this in the press. We've seen this with other companies. The CISO is the fall guy, and the CISO isn't getting what the others are getting, but they're the fall guy. So that's one of the challenges I see.
Well, I love your seventh grade analogy. I think that's brilliant, and it really paints the picture of what security is today. And those points are very well taken. So thank you. And Vaughn, if you were have the stage and you could get up in front of all the companies out there as a CISO, and you're saying to them, this is how a CISO role should be defined, and this is what we really need to get our job done. I know that there's now almost a crossover between the CISO taking on some sort of a CIO role as well, bringing the business part of the job into the technology part of the job. What would you say that you would need? What tools? What would be your wish list?
Wow. I think that I think the real point of that question is what is it that is being expected of that role? And it changes from organization to organization, because I've been in other organizations where I may have had responsibility for brand risk and other elements. Um, it really depends on what your role is there. But one of the key factors of success is having full executive support for what you're doing. So it starts there. Secondly, it takes a great team. Cybersecurity is a team sport. You are not successful on your own. It's not about the CISO. It's about that entire team. And that's I was hoping you would ask me what I find the most rewarding in my role, and
One moment. What do you find the most rewarding in your role?
and to me, it's really about building wonderful teams.
Yeah.
It's about attracting, developing, and retaining a fantastic talent.
Yeah.
To me, that's what brings me the greatest satisfaction, because they go out and they make me look great. I don't have to do all that much, other than keep them engaged and focused and going in the right direction, and they just do a fantastic job. And that to me is the key factor of success as a CISO. The executive engagement, having the great team, and then the rest of it you can figure out. But you've got to be able to have those as a foundation, and then of course you've got to be able to communicate risk so that you can focus that executive leadership where it needs to be focused. But those are the key factors to success from my point of view.
Well, I love that. And, you can't highlight enough about people forget the folks that they need to focus on people. We talk about the people, the process, the technology, and the governance. And I think, Ray, that was a conversation we had, and you highlighted that a few times in terms of you got to have the governance as well. Can you talk to that point for a moment?
Sure. I think, and I've worked with lots of different financial institutions more specifically, but certainly in life sciences, to help them set up the proper governance, help them set up the first, second, and third line of defense, help them put together something that works, and that it's always trust and verify. So when you get to your three lines of defense, each next line, the second line's trusting and verifying the first, and the third is trusting and verifying the first two, and that's what hones down the risk and brings things to light. I will say I have seen more outfits and firms and companies out there that possibly do an amazing job of assessing, but a terrible job of following up, a terrible job of implementation. There's so many things we can do out there, but we talked a little bit about vendor third party assessments. I've seen places out there assess amazingly well on site, listing all the criticals, highs, and medium issues, putting them in a book and putting them on a shelf. Never looked at them again. So when they're asked the questions, tell us about your program, they do, but they don't talk about the mitigation of the problems. I've seen it. I've seen it all around. I've seen people that just don't. But it's a thorough end-to-end process that needs to be checked and honed. And with the three lines of defense, with a proper governance model, you can do that.
Oh, that's great. And I'd like to pivot for a moment as, a big part of our audience. It's always, how do I approach a CISO? I want to get their time. I don't want to approach them in a wrong way, as Vaughn so eloquently shared with us. Don't contact his wife. He doesn't want you to go that route. I don't think anybody wants their family members contacted to get to them. I think that's an invasion of privacy. Obviously, that's crossing over the boundaries of professionalism. So if each of you would give just a quick overview of how would you like to be approached if vendors are looking to approach you. Obviously, the knowns of doing their homework, understanding where you sit in the organization, what you're looking for. But what other kind of pointers could you give to our audience if they would like to approach you in a way that's meaningful, that you would want to give them a few minutes of your time? Vaughn?
Well, I think that where I've seen vendors have the greatest success is when they come to the CISO forums, CISO summits, things of that nature, and they have a discussion. They lead a discussion, whether they're presenting or speaking or whatever, and they focus on real challenges, and they talk about solutions more generically, and they don't focus on trying to sell their product. And you do that, and you have an interesting topic, and you delve into that, and you show that you're an expert in that arena, and folks will come up and talk to you on their own. You don't have to ask them to talk to you. You don't have to go and approach them. If you are engaging the profession that way, you're going to see people come up to you afterwards and want to discuss it more and find out more about what you're doing about it. I think, to me, that's where I've seen historically where people have had the greatest success.
No, I love that. I think it's so interesting. No matter what people talk about, no matter what conversations we're all having, it always boils down to the human in some way or another. Having that human connection, understanding the relationships, having the right team, knowing who you could count on. And we have all this technology that's being blown out in every which way. The advancement is coming so quickly as quantum computing is getting a center stage as we're moving toward the advancement of our technology in this crazy ecosystem we call the world. We can't highlight enough the importance of the relationships we have and the relationships you have within your organization, but also externally facing. And I always like to ask the folks who I talk to and have conversations with if they could give a cybersecurity helpful hint to the industry or to our audience today. So, Ray, what would you say if you can talk to, let's call it the whole world out there? What would be the most important cybersecurity tip you can give to them, whether it being personally or business? Pick whichever one you'd like.
Sure. And I can say that's network and make friends. And
Yeah.
I'm going to have to say that it's very, very rare that I come across another CISO that sits in their office, doesn't attend very many conferences and roundtables and whatnot, and makes the decisions based upon what the vendors are telling them to do. I can tell you that the most important thing for me is having mentors. As I mentioned, Steve Katz was one of mine. And the group we have here are amongst great people that I know very well, known them for years, and can rely on them, trust them, and say, hey, what went wrong? I can think of major breaches we've had in the past 10 years and where they've been, at what pharmaceutical companies or at what banks. And those individuals, those CISOs, reached out to their colleagues similar to them in the industry for help, not to a vendor, not to anywhere else. And that really, really worked because these are people we trust. And so I would say my number one advice, pick a mentor or two to have, stick with that person, and then move forward. Bounce ideas off. It just works fantastically.
I love that. Thank you. And Vaughn?
So I love Ray's approach. The only thing I'm going to change slightly is that you need to have resilience, and part of that resilience is having people even outside the profession who you can lean on when things are tough. You need to have a nice network of friends and folks that you can lean on when you really don't know what else to do. For mental health, it's really critical that you have that, and these roles can be challenging, and I know that a lot of people face burnout and other issues related to that. Part of that is having that resilience, having that depth of the network. Part of it is having the mentorship. Part of it is having foundations so that what you can and can't do, and you don't take on more than you can. So I think all of those fit into it, but I would just say watch out for your mental health.
Now, that's a very, very important point you're raising, and I think that's often overlooked in our industry, but it's very prevalent in our industry. So thank you for highlighting that. And Vaughn and Ray, thank you very much for joining us here today on Clarity. I know our audience gained a lot of knowledge from you and appreciated your insights into these topics. And thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Clarity.